Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. And in this video, what I want to do is talk about boilerplate. At the end of the day, like, especially if you're in your early stages of web development or just trying to create a quick project, you're probably not going to be whipping out a framework like React or Angular just for something quick and simple. You're probably just going to do an HTML, CSS, JavaScript page. And the question is kind of how to set up a boilerplate or just have to create a boilerplate that you have ready to go whenever you want to create one. And that's what this video is for. So it serves two purposes. One, to walk you through how to set up the boilerplate if you want to create a project like this, and to walk you through how you can set it up in a template style on GitHub, so that way in the future, if you want to make another project, you can just literally use a template you've already created. And you can customize the template I'm going to make however you want for your needs. Okay. So basic bottom line is I'm going to just go in the terminal. I have VS Code opened up to an empty folder. And what I am going to do is I'm going to touch several things. So I'm going to first make my folders, make their images, JS, CSS. Okay, and anything else I want in there? No. Okay, and then I'll just make another folder called MISC, just in case there's any other files you may want. Okay, now what I'm going to want to do is in the MISC and the images folder, because there's going to be no images or MISC in the template, but we want those folders intact for GitHub, because GitHub will usually ignore empty folders. So in those folders, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a file. So touch images /getkeep. It's just an empty file called getkeep. It doesn't do anything. It's just by having the file in there, Git won't ignore that empty folder. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing in MISC. So MISC/.getkeep. Okay, and that'll just keep those two folders from being ignored by Git. Now I'm going to want to create an index.html. That's going to be our main page. And then I'm going to want to also touch a js/app.js and a css/style.css. Okay, so that way I have all my stuff nice and organized. There's my CSS file. There's my JavaScript file. And again, I got a git keep, so that way these folders are there. Theoretically, you would use this images folder if you need to save any images that you want to use on your website. MISC is to save any miscellaneous files you might need, like fonts or your favicon or things like that. Okay, so that way we have them all in a nice one easy place that you prefer to. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to go to my index.html. I'm going to set up my boilerplate using Emmet, so I can just do the exclamation point to use VS Code to shortcut that documentation. We'll just call this, like, my HTML template. And what I'm going to want to do is I like to have everything clearly labeled. Apologize for recovering from a cold. And I'm going to want to have my personal JS CSS. Okay, I'm going to make that a comment by doing a control/. There we go. And then we're going to have external JS CSS. So basically these are like our bootstraps, our jQueries, things like that. Just like to have a clear section for where I want to put these things in my head tag. Okay, just makes it easier for me to think through where things go. I always want the external stuff to be listed first and then my stuff to be listed second. So then I can go in there and I want to link my CSS file. So I'm going to just do a link tag. So link CSS. Okay, and then I'm just going to make sure that this points to where my file should be, which should be in the same folder. So I'm going to use a ./CSS/style. Okay, I could also take off the dot, assuming that the website's being served by a static server. For now, I'm going to keep the dot. Okay, just to keep it nice and explicit. That way it's an explicit file path instead of a URL path. Okay, and there are distinctions between that. If you want to hear more about the distinctions between relative and absolute URLs versus relative and absolute file paths, head over to docs.devnursery.com. So I'll show you real quick. If you go to docs.devnursery.com, you're going to find the new dev docs. You can click on that. And then if you click over here, okay, I think I have that discussion in here in the terminal reference. And here it gets into file paths. Okay, and I think it gets into URLs in the how the internet works section. So in here, it'll talk about like URLs and how URLs work. And it's important to understand the difference between a URL and a file path. Because theoretically here in this href property, that could be a URL or a file path. I'm not going to kind of get into those nuances right now, but just something to be aware of. Okay, but that link tag is going to link our HTML file to our CSS file, so that gets loaded up. And then we're going to have our script tag, script source, and I'm going to link that to our JS file, so ./js/app.js. And then I'm going to add the defer keyword, so that way it doesn't run our JavaScript till after the DOM loads. So that way, any kind of DOM logic we have in there is going to run just fine. Cool. Now, two typical things that, especially for like small projects, you may want to kind of throw in there are probably going to be things like jQuery. So that would be code.jQuery.com. Okay. And I'm going to just choose this uncompressed, click right here. And then I just copy the script tag. And then I'm going to put that under my external JS CSS. And then theoretically, I could add things like Bootstrap, Milligram, Foundation, whatever other types of external things you want to connect. But that should be pretty good for now. Okay. In case you want to use jQuery for anything. Okay. If not, you can just comment that out. So again, I just have that there. And again, I might just comment that out if I'm not going to use it. And then comment it in if I'm going to. But that way I have it in my template if I want to use it. In general, I'm going to basically... I generally want to kind of use my semantic tags. So I'm going to just put in my header, my main, and my footer tags. So that way, semantically, my website's kind of laid out. And then theoretically, I would then, build out the header section of my page, the main part of my page, and the footer of my page within those tags. Okay. And for now, I'll just put an H1 inside the header. My template page. Okay, and then we can edit it kind of more from there. The point is just to set up this boilerplate that we can use. Okay, so that's generally how the HTML will look like to start off with. And now we're going to set up the boilerplate for the JavaScript. The JavaScript generally is not going to be any real JavaScript in there, but I do want a few things in there. I like to create little sections just to make it easier for me to sort of organize later on. So what I'll do is I'll create little things like this. Okay, where I can put little titles. Okay, and then here's maybe where I would want to put any like global variables. Okay. And then maybe, here's where I'll define any functions. So I have somewhere to kind of put that. And then, I'll make a section for like, main code logic. So the idea is that any code that's going to run should start in that section. Okay, so essentially I will define my variables, define my functions, and then whatever code's going to happen that I want to happen. Okay, but that way it's all nice and organized. I kind of know I have a place to put stuff. Okay. And, oftentimes I don't like to create a bunch of one-off global variables. I like to have like global state in a sense. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll create a variable. We'll call it like globals. Okay, which will be an object. And then I can define any global variables there instead of giving them their own variable names. So that way I'm not having to worry about variable names. Like if there's something I'm going to keep around forever, it's going to be tidied up in this object. Okay, unless I want to organize it even further and create other objects by different names, which depends on the specific project that I'm making. But the idea is that I have like this one place to organize anything that's just going to kind of persist. Okay, you might call it globals, you might call it states, whatever. I'm going to call it globals because I think semantically that's going to make the most sense regardless of your level of experience right now. Okay, and yeah, so that's my JavaScript that was all set. So that way I can just easily kind of be off to the races. Now for CSS, we're going to have a little bit more work to do because generally what we're going to want to do is do a few things so that we're all set up for like success. Okay, so first thing I'm going to want to do is I want to set up my layers. So I'm going to say add layer. We're going to have a few different layers. We're going to have a reset layer, which is generally we're going to put styles that are meant to sort of reset existing styles. Okay, so I'll put that there, sort of my base layer. Okay, then we're gonna have a base layer, so it's just gonna be sort of your general styling, like your things that you want true for everywhere, like, you know, what's the font for everywhere, what's not. And then we're gonna have component, which is when you want to style like specific sections of your page. Okay. And the beautiful thing about layers, it just makes thinking through your CSS a lot simpler, because generally I have a section. Basically, I know that my components, basically my more specific sections of my page, styling for that should be more higher priority over my defaults, which should be higher priority over my reset. Okay, and then this is just going to create those like nice priority layers, so that way it's very clear what the priority of my styling is. And then what I do is I just create a section to style for where I would write all the rules for each one. So reset gets its own section. So that would be at layer, reset, at layer base, at layer components. Okay. Cool. So then basically what I would do here is in my reset, I'm generally going to probably just use my all selector, and I'm going to do just a basic reset on everything. So that means just like I want everything's margin to be zeroed out. I want everything's padding to be zeroed out. Okay, I want box sizing to be border box. That way when I add padding or border, that it doesn't add to my width, it's included in my width and height. Okay, which makes just thinking through spacing a lot easier. Okay, and then we can add any additional sort of reset properties from there, but that should kind of keep you out of most trouble. Okay, nice. Okay, and that's going to activate my reset, and if there's anything else that I want to like undo or unset from the defaults, I would do it in my reset. So that's going to be my lowest priority, basically, that basically absent anything else, the default should be nothing. Okay, and then here's I'm going to start putting in my sort of more page specific rules. So probably not a bad place to start defining my variables. And then I can override my variables in my components layer if I need to override them. So what I'll probably do here is I'll create a root selector. And then, you know, there's all sorts of different variables I'd like to define. Again, variables are always going to start off with 2 dashes. So I might want to start off with like a primary color, because generally you're going to want to have, you know, a couple different colors that are sort of your main colors. So I generally have a primary color. You know, we'll just say red for now. Okay, my secondary color, just say is blue. Okay, usually I would have them contrast with each other, so that way, like, generally, you know, actually sometimes what I would do is I would call this my background color and my foreground color. So that way, sometimes you may want to flip them over for font, you know, fonts. So basically, like this might be, let's say gray, and then this would be blue. Okay, and then I might have like an accent color, just another color that I use for like borders, you know, whatever. And you can have as many of these variables as you want. You know, we'll say orange. But that way these variables are consistent. So that way later on, if you want to change the styling for your whole page, you just change these variables in one place. So I might want to change like my standard padding, default padding. You know, might want to be like 5 pixels. Default margin, we'll say 5 pixels. You know, etc. You know, and I just keep creating all these like different variables that I'll use throughout. Okay. And then from there, you know, I may want to start doing things like styling from there. But these are just going to be, again, just your basic all around. So I might define some variables. Maybe I'll choose some fonts. Okay. So I'll say like, hey, main font, title font. What I'll do is I'll just say Helvetica, comic. I'll say sans serif. although I think there's a dash there. And then, you know, we'll say text font. Do something like Georgia, I think, is a font. Sans serif. Cool. And then what I can do is I can target all my H1s, all my titles, H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. Okay. Make sure that those all have the title font, whatever that it's going to be. So font family, var title font. And then make sure that the font for everything else is going to be whatever my text font is going to be. So I'll use the all selector here, okay, which will override the all selector and the reset. Because again, the layers are, components are going to be the highest priority layer. So basically reset will apply unless there's a rule in base, which will override reset, and rules and components will override base. Okay, and again, I have these 3 layers. I write all my stylings in those layers. And it just makes it where like it's just easier for me to think through which of my styles are overriding what. Okay, so in this case here, what I'll do is I'll do font family, text font, var text font. Okay, and again, it's just by using the variables, I know that if I want to change the values of most things on my page, I just have to go change the values here. I'd rather use variables as much as I can everywhere else as possible. Okay. Because that way, again, it just makes the maintaining, like later on I want to switch something out, I really only have to go make my changes here instead of having to go hunt around everywhere I use a particular value. Okay, so that's all fun and good. And then here are my components layers where I start like laying, you know, taking care of like sections of my page. So I might have a style for header, the top part of my page. I might have a style for main and a style for footer. Okay, and with all of them, I'll just put a basic rule just because it's a template, just something that I know is already, that I'll probably eventually put in there, you know, give a specific answer later on. Okay, and then I basically would, you know, I would generally use this as my top layer for styling and then use nested styles in there. So for example, if I were to open up this page as it is, open up with Live Server, which will open it up right over here. See my template page. Now, let's say I want to start styling this H1 that's in the header. I will stick to do it inside here because that's my header area, and I can use nested styles now in CSS. So I can say, hey, I want to style the H1 that's in header, okay, and say, okay, the color of that's going to be, you know, var title color. Or we'll say foreground color. Okay. Which doesn't immediately work because when you're using a element selector with nested styles, what you gotta do is you gotta use this ampersand first. I have to do like that. Okay, and you see it takes the color. Okay, but now I can nest, so anything, and notice if I put an H1 inside of main or footer, that H1 is going to be unaffected because of nesting. So that way I really kind of know exactly okay, I know exactly what I'm targeting. Okay, and by keeping all my styles sort of relative to that section's element, okay, so I want to style a particular class within header or whatnot, then this allows me to kind of specify the styling for specific components of my page, the header, the main, the footer. And then here, if I need something that's going to go beyond one of the components, I'd make that as part of my base layer. Like if I want to style a div for the whole page, divs for the whole page, I would do it here in my base layer. Anything that's specific to my header, main, or footer area, I would then do here. Okay, and then again, anytime I need to just like reset a property for somewhere, like there's some browser default I want to undo, I would do that here. And this just gives me sort of a more systematic way of writing my CSS in an organized way where I kind of know where things belong and I know why I'm using different sections. But now that I have the template all set to go, I can now save it with Git. So I'll do a git init to create a Git repository in this folder. I'm going to head over to github.com. Okay, I need to create a repository, but you can't do it on a small screen, so I got to stretch this out. There we go. We got the plus button now. Create a new repository, and we're going to say, hey, actually, I have organization for templates, so I'm going to go AlexMercedTemplates, and we'll call this HTML CSS Boilerplate 2023. I'll make it public. That way, if other people want to use it, they can. Okay, and then I'm going to copy this URL right here, paste that over here. So now that adds the remote to my local repo, connecting my local repo to the repo on GitHub. I can now push it up. I like to create special commands on my terminal. You can do so as well. If you want to learn more how to do that, on the Dev Nursery docs, there is a section on bash scripting. So you can learn about writing bash scripts and bash functions and things like that. Okay, but I have this bash function that I created that only works on my computer. So if you do this, it won't work on yours, called pushy, that basically does a git add everything, gits commits, and then git pushes. So I can just do this all in one command and just say, hey, template, origin main. And now it's doing the git add, it's doing the git commit, it's doing the git push. And now I have it all here. Okay, now once this is all in the git, and one other file I would want to add is a readme.md. Because you want to write your documentation. Okay, so template. I push that up again. Okay. And then when you're fresh, see there's my little template file. Okay. And what you can do is you click over to settings, which for me, since the screen size, I have to hit the 3 dots over here and there's settings. And if you go to settings, you'll see that there's this little button here, template repository. If you click that, it turns this repository into a template. So now when I go back to the main page, okay, let me refresh it. Okay, it's probably just too small, so let me stretch this out a little bit. There it is. Okay, so you see this use this template button. That occurs because I checked it off as a template. Now what I can do is in the future, if I want to create a new project, I can create a new repository from this template, which creates a new repo based on this template, and then I can just clone that down and work from there. Okay, so that way I can always have like a consistent starting place and save all that setup time from having to set up every single time, because I can just create a new copy of that template. Okay, so hopefully you guys find this useful in creating a nice quick boilerplate for yourself in 2023 using some of these new CSS features like CSS nesting and layers, which really allows us to create some really systematic, organized CSS boilerplate. But with that, the only thing we could do to make this even more modern is we could take advantage of ES modules if you wanted to do that. Okay, which just means you want to write your JavaScript any different. At least initially, it's only if you decide you want to start importing things and writing your JavaScript over multiple files. But if you wanted to do that, what you would do is here in your JavaScript, you would just add another attribute called type, and you would change it to module. And then what could happen, once you have like this type module, I could do things like, let's say I created another JavaScript file that's just one function, func.js. Okay, and this just had a function that said, hello world, that all it does is console log hello world. What I'd be able to do now, because it's a module, which is a newer way of writing JavaScript, not so new anymore, but what I can do now is I could export default hello world and make that the thing that this file sends out. And then I can go back over here, and now I could do something like import hello world, and see it imports hello world from the func file. And now I could actually use it. So if you wanted to like stretch your code across multiple files, so that way instead of hello world being defined in this file, I could have multiple files that define all my JavaScript. Okay, and again, if I go over here and I look at my DevTools, we'll see that it's working. See, there's failed to load resources server responded with status of 404. I didn't find the file. I think it's because I need to have it as a URL. So I think it's /js/func, And I think you have to put the full name, .js. Okay. I'm going to start with, and I think I have to do this, slash. Yep, and see, now it works. Okay, so see that function works because it's importing the function from this file. And again, in order to be able to use this import-export syntax, the one difference you have to make is you have to add this type module in your script tag. And that allows you to do what's called ES module syntax. So you can now break up your code across multiple files, and you can all just have one script tag for your main JavaScript file, and then all your other JavaScript files can then be imported from there. So you see here, I imported that JavaScript file from there. Okay, so this way, because what used to happen in the past is that for every JavaScript file you wanted, you'd have to create a separate script tag, and you would just end up having like 50 script tags in your HTML file, which get really cluttered really quick. So yeah, hopefully you guys learned a lot from this. My name is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. Make sure to check out, again, docs.devnursery.com for lots of great content. You can also go to devnursery.com to find lots of great videos. But otherwise, I'll see you all later. Have a great day and enjoy.